Hello and welcome to Redaction Report for our March 2022 full show. We've got a cracking show ahead, got a couple of really great guests going to be upcoming throughout the course of proceedings today. Just before we dive in though, quick bit of housekeeping. Some of you who follow our show regularly will be aware that we are currently doing a fundraiser. We at Redaction Report are supporting Save the Children in the amazing work they do, and especially with regards their work supporting child refugees fleeing Ukraine. We are doing a limited edition podcast on Ukrainian history. You can find it on our YouTube channel. I will put links in the description, both for that and for a donate link. So please, if you're feeling generous, do drop Save the Children what you can spare. It's a really great cause. Should also add that April's full show will be slightly earlier in the month, as I am going to be away on holiday for half of the month. So keep an eye out slightly earlier in the month if you're a regular viewer. Today, we are going to start with one of the biggest topics in the world today. Once again, that is the situation in Ukraine. We're going to take a slightly different approach today, though. We're going to be looking at some of the reactions we've seen in Western media, breaking them down, because as with any major world event comes a lot of bad takes, and we are going to be dissecting those, seeing what's wrong with them, and thinking about how we can objectively look at the Ukraine situation. I'm joined by our good friend Declan Carey, who is going to be lending a hand here. Declan, how's it going?
Not bad, thanks, James. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, all things considered. So let's dive straight in today. What we've seen in the news today is this. So Boris Johnson calls for Ukraine to host Euro 2028, despite the UK-Ireland bid. This is reported in The Guardian here. Boris Johnson has described Russian plans to host the 2028 Men's European Championship as beyond satire. So this is the news that Russia has put in a bid to host Euro 2028. And Boris Johnson has spoken against it, saying maybe Ukraine should host it, in spite of the fact that the UK and Ireland are putting in a bid together. What do you make of this, Declan? What do you think Johnson's trying to achieve here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a slightly odd thing to say, considering the UK status. As you mentioned, the UK and Ireland are putting in a bid for Euro 2028. Of course, you know, if Johnson is genuine and really wants Ukraine to host a tournament, then I think very few people would oppose that. But the timing of this message, I think it was just a day after a tweet went out from his official account saying the government is right behind the UK's bid, just seems a little bit odd. And there have been some people who have pointed out that perhaps it's sort of motivated by something else. Maybe he's trying to get a little bit of more publicity or a little bit more attention to the UK's bid. Obviously, it would be a big thing in the UK. It would also be, you know, a huge thing for Ukraine down the line, and possibly part of the rebuilding process there. So he's got a little bit of flack over this today, and I'm not sure whether it's deserved. I'm not sure whether he's genuinely just said it without really realizing the UK status, or whether there is anything darker or, you know, anything bigger there at play. So yeah, I'm kind of almost giving him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here, but I do understand the people who have criticised him over it.
It's often hard to tell with Boris Johnson, isn't it?
That's the thing, is it's the kind of whole performance that you get of Johnson as Prime Minister. You know, it's been well documented, well found. So I mean, I don't know. Yeah, what's your view of it? What do you make of it all?
I think one thing that's worth considering here is that Boris Johnson is deeply unpopular at the UK at this moment in time, in large part because of the whole Partygate scandal. That's definitely a topic for another day. But it's one thing worth really bearing in mind is that he is massively popular in Ukraine at the moment, because he's seen as being one of the most stalwart allies in supporting the military effort in Ukraine from Western nations and from Western liberal democracies. The UK has been providing arms, weaponry for the Ukrainian military, and there's even been reports that as they're firing NLAW, anti-aircraft missiles, that Ukrainian military are shouting "God save the Queen" as they do so. So there's very much a chance that Boris Johnson tried to shore up support in Ukraine here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned Partygate a little bit. I think this is 100% pushed tension away from that. It's still something that people remember, but it's certainly not number one topic on the agenda at the moment. And you're right, Boris Johnson does seem to be very popular in Ukraine at the moment. So it could well be a piece of political posturing, which, if it was, would be, I suppose, disappointing, because if we're looking at ways that the UK can help Ukraine, as much as it's good to have the support for something like this, but if there's an ulterior motive behind that, then it would be disappointing. I'm not for one second saying that that's 100% what Johnson wanted to do. It could well have just been something he said, and could well have changed his mind of what's happened in the last few weeks. We don't really know. We never will know. But
Boris Johnson's one well known for throwaway comments.
Yeah, that's the thing, and we've got to take that into account with these things that are said. So yeah, I personally, I'm not too critical of him with this.
No, I mean, there are far bigger things to criticize Boris Johnson over than this. What do you reckon, though? Should we be back in Ukraine 2028 for the Euros?
I mean, I think it'd be brilliant. I mean, it's hosted similar tournaments before. I think I forget which year it was when it was shared with Poland. But yeah, it's hosted tournaments. It's got the stadiums. It's got a football crazy nation. I think it'd be brilliant. I just wonder whether it would have the infrastructure. I think depends really how long the Russian invasion goes on for, because we've seen sort of infrastructure being blown to pieces as one of the Russian targets. So there will be a huge rebuilding project if it's done in time. I think it'd be brilliant, and perhaps it could even be part of that. Everyone could go to Ukraine and everyone can sample some of the great things that are in the country. So yeah, I think it'd be brilliant, actually.
Yeah, it'd be great to watch. As much as I'd love to see England host the Euros or even host the World Cup, although that bid's now been scuppered for 2030, it would be a bit of a moment to see Ukraine hosting either the Euros or probably not the World Cup for now, but Euro 2028 Ukraine, let us have it.
Absolutely.
Let's look at another Ukraine take then that's been a bit controversial. This is the Stop the War Coalition. Now, for some context for international viewers, Stop the War Coalition is an organization in the UK that was founded around the time of the start of what we'd now call the War on Terror, well, what was then called the War on Terror 2, around the time of the invasion of Afghanistan, very notably opposed the Iraq War. There was a massive demonstration in London against the Iraq War back just before it happened. Stop the War was pivotal behind that. At the same time, there are more problematic aspects to Stop the War. I think we're about to look at some of those now. So let's look at their statement from the 22nd of February, 2022. This is 2 days before the invasion fully started. Stop the War condemns the movement of Russian forces into eastern Ukraine and urges that they immediately withdraw, alongside the resumption of diplomatic negotiations to resolve the crisis. This dispute could and should be resolved peacefully, and that remains the only basis for a lasting settlement, rather than the imposition of military solutions. What do we make of this?
I think there's a couple of problematic parts of this statement.
Yeah, I haven't read the full thing out yet. I think there's more to come.
Yeah. I mean, I know that you and Kit Roberts have touched on this a little bit in a previous Redaction Report episode. And I mean, for me, just looking at a couple of the opening lines, for me, one of the ones that stands out is the fact that this is not the responsibility of the Russian or Ukrainian governments alone. And I think I appreciate the sentiment of that. I appreciate that it's trying to say, you know, that the statement is trying to convey that this is a world problem, and this is a problem that the world needs to tackle. And I hope that's the main meaning behind it. But to remove any responsibility of this from the Russian government just seems to me as the completely wrong approach to this. That there's no one else responsible for this apart from the Russian government and Vladimir Putin, and they should be held responsible for everything that's happening now. All the children that are being bombed in theaters in Mariupol, the Ukrainian people who are starving in cities, to somehow place that on NATO, I think is a ridiculous statement. You know, I think Ukraine, NATO membership is part of Ukraine's constitution. It should have every right to be part of that alliance if it wants to. Of course, whether it will or not is another question. But the idea that it has the possibility to choose its own fate, I think is a really, really powerful one, which I think NATO should be defending, and Stop the War Coalition should be defending too. And, you know, fully appreciate their point of view, diplomacy before anything else. But when it comes to a situation where you've been invaded by an aggressive neighbor who is, according to reports, actively targeting civilians who are unarmed, starving cities, then I think removing any responsibility away from the Russian government or military is completely the wrong way to go about this. And it's quite frankly an awful take on the situation. Just my view on one of the opening lines anyway. There's more, which which isn't great.
There's a lot to unpack here, as they say. Yes, I think you're quite right there. Let's be clear. There's plenty to criticize in NATO. Let's not pretend that there's not a dark side to NATO's history. At the same time, that's irrelevant here. And that's the bottom line. NATO is not to blame for what's happening in Ukraine right now. Certainly, there's only one leader who's responsible for what's going on. That is Vladimir Putin. NATO expansion did not force him to invade Ukraine. The Eastern European countries that joined NATO since the end of the Cold War joined so of their own volition. This is not some imperialist project. This is not some grand conspiracy. They joined NATO because they wanted to be part of a defensive alliance against the country under whose subjugation they had been since the end of the Second World War. That's the context we've got to consider here. The Baltic states, which were part of the Soviet Union, are part of NATO. Other old Warsaw Pact countries, such as Poland, are in NATO. There's nothing controversial in suggesting that Ukraine should be a NATO member.
Not at all. It's almost like the more I think of it, the worse it gets. It's almost pandering to some kind of, you know, Russian imperial dreams of greater Russia again, to take away responsibility from the Russian government.
Well, that's been the whole idea of the eastern and southern Ukraine provinces, as this whole idea of Novorossiya, isn't it?
Reclaiming that kind of Russian land, which they think is theirs. And yeah, anyway, hugely problematic start to that. Another part of this I don't really like is a little bit further down, about halfway through, they encourage a return to the Minsk II agreement. And again, I just want to point this out because I think this is a problem now, because the conditions of the Minsk II agreement should have stopped any kind of conflict happening between Russia and Ukraine. That was the whole point of it in the first place. There can be no returning to that agreement now. The reason Ukraine signed up to that agreement, which essentially allowed there to be a kind of no man's land in the Donbass between Russia and Ukraine with troops on both sides. Essentially, Ukrainian territory has Russian troops on it. The only reason that was signed was to stop something like what we've got happen now, where Ukrainian cities are being bombed, civilians are being killed. The fact that that's happened, the fact that Ukrainians are now under attack from all sides, from an aggressive Russian army, they can never go back to now a situation, in my opinion, where Russian soldiers occupy part of Ukraine. Because otherwise, what was the point in it? What did all those people die for? Why did we? We could have done something like that ages ago, but we didn't. That was supposed to stop what's happened now. So I think that's a really problematic thing to say, that when that agreement's been violated by Russia, that we go back to that and we just sort of pretend everything's okay, because it's not now. It won't be like that again. The world has changed from this event. Russia's actions will have huge consequences for the whole of Russia, for the world, even. And going back to something like that, where Ukrainian territory remains to be occupied by Russian troops, I don't think any Ukrainian would want to sign up for that.
Absolutely not. Ultimately, what we're seeing here with this Stop the War statement is a wrongful, a misguided both sides of the issue. And it's not the first time we see this in big political debates, and it won't be the last either, but it's got to be called out when it's there. We've got to be abundantly clear about what's happening in Ukraine. It's purely a war of aggression on the part of Russia. And it's one of the things that's so utterly tragic about the Ukraine war, is that it's such a pointless war. What are all these, both Ukrainian civilians, Ukrainian soldiers, and Russian soldiers, what are they dying for? What are they dying for? They're just dying for one sad little dictator's dreams of empire.
Yeah,
utterly tragic.
We have seen reports on social media of Russian soldiers, a very small minority of actually giving up, surrendering, not going to fight. And I don't blame them. I really, really don't blame them. Imagine imagine you're a Russian soldier and you're taken from your home and you're sent to Ukraine and told to attack people who, most of them speak the same language as you. The culture is, it's not the same, but it's similar. Most Ukrainians probably have some sort of Russian family somewhere. Lots of Russian people have Ukrainian family too. I just can't imagine being a soldier and being sent over and being told, go and attack these people and just following that order. So yeah, I understand why Russian soldiers are. Some Russian soldiers, a minority of them, are not following orders, and why there's been reports of that. I think this is probably one of the reasons why Russia didn't achieve its aims in Ukraine straight away, because I can't imagine there's very much motivation among the Russian army to do this, to risk their life to take Mariupol, or to take Kharkiv. I don't see what the motivation is for them. What do they get from that? And very, very little, if anything, compared to the motivation of the Ukrainian army, which is defending its homeland. So yeah, I think that's going to be a big part of this conflict, this war, as it goes on too.
Anyway, let's spare ourselves with more bad Ukraine takes now.
Agree.
If you want to learn a bit more about Ukraine, please consider watching the first episode of our show, our limited edition podcast on Ukrainian history. You can find it on our YouTube channel. Just follow the links below. We'll be putting more episodes out on that in due course. We've got some really interesting topics lined up. We're going to be looking at the history of Ukraine and the Soviet Union, at the history of the Kievan Rus, at the history of Ukrainians' Jewish community, and even more to come over the coming months. So please keep tabs on that. And of course, we're doing all of that as part of a fundraiser for Save the Children. Again, link in the description. Please consider donating. Welcome back. Now, North Korea is a country that's barely out of the news ever. From all the eccentricities of the Kim regime to often wheeled out threats of nuclear annihilation, there always seems to be a unique fascination with the country. But it is one of the most repressive regimes on the planet. Millions of its citizens live in poverty and misery under a relentlessly repressive and invasive police state. One of the reasons, of course, that it does make headlines frequently is its nuclear program. Now, of course, Kim Jong-un met with Donald Trump after an exchange of fiery rhetoric back in 2017, but tensions have come and gone over the years. I'm joined today by Dr. Sojin Lim of the University of Central Lancaster to understand the ongoing tensions in North Korea. Sojin, how's it going?
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me for this talk today. Yes, as you said, we saw kind of the love letter moment between Kim Jong-un and Trump for about 2 years. Here we call it as a gesture politics. Then all of a sudden, with the realization from the Kim Jong-un's side, as I see, then the things became to normal or new normal with the COVID-19 situation. And during those 2 years, when Kim and Trump had a summits and had a handshake exchanges, then there was no such missile test. But right after, then Kim Jong-un began his missile test, but we didn't see any long-range missile tests, just only for short-range projectiles. But recently, Kim Jong-un began to work on the Yongbyon reactor facility as well, and also he tried different kinds of technology. For example, the one of the most recent missile tests was from the moving train. So he's just trying and showing the world that North Korea has the tactics and technology and capability to develop the nuclear program and further. So that is the status quo. And that's how I see the whole situation is coming back to normal.
What's sparked this recent change? Because of course, last year, North Korea announced that freeze in nuclear testing was going to come to an end. And now the Pentagon is reporting and claiming that North Korea is actually testing an intercontinental ballistic missile that has the potential to reach the United States. What's led to that change of policy?
So from my point of view, there are two external factors. One is the reaction from Biden in the States. So the United States, Joe Biden's strategy is really different from Donald Trump's, and it's more like Obama's strategic patience. And as we saw, the US, the current government even abandoned, I would call it abandoned, the Afghanistan. And North Korea is not significant factor for its foreign policy. And the Korean Peninsula itself for the US is kind of buffer zone between the trade war or this geopolitical war between China and the US. So that was why the North Korea has not been that much significant place in US foreign policy. But for Kim Jong-un's point of view, Kim Jong wants to keep the momentum. Kim Jong wants to be seen as an important part of the US foreign policy. So that's why Kim Jong tries to kind of increase the level of the seriousness of his nuclear program and test. And another factor I see is the recent presidential election in South Korea. So before and after now, Kim Jong-un didn't, before the election result, Kim Jong-un didn't know who would be the new president. But in order to give the message to the politicians that Kim Jong-un had to see and gauging the environment. And now it has been clear that the conservative president will be there, which will be more hostile environment for North Korea than the liberal or progressive political party president. So now Kim Jong-un knows that anyhow, which will bit different from the previous or the current outgoing president's time. So Kim Jong-un really now kind of building up and preparing for this coming new environment.
So President Moon Jae-in met with Kim Jong-un across the demilitarized zone. It was very widely broadcasted ahead of meeting with Donald Trump. How is that policy likely going to change? Because, of course, like you say, Yoon Suk-yeol is much more of a conservative, much more of a hardliner. What's the change in policy going to look like? Are we going to be seeing any meetings, or is it going to be more hostile now?
If we see the past, no president from the Conservative Party had a meeting with the leaders in North Korea, but it does not mean that Yoon Suk-yeol will not meet Kim Jong-un. If the situation or circumstances are met, then he will. But that circumstances, the conditions will be something North Korea probably not agree with, because Yoon Suk-yeol made it clear during his campaign, saying that North Korea is a threat, and he will increase the deterrence with the US in South Korea, bringing more THAADs, for example. And he also said that he will provide fund for the UN resolution for the human rights in North Korea. For example, President Moon Jae-in did not even talk about human rights issues about North Koreans or defectors, because he did not want to make Kim Jong-un upset in a way. But now Yoon Suk-yeol doesn't have a fear about that. So Yoon Suk-yeol made it clear that the denuclearization should come first. So if there is any talk about denuclearization, then maybe Yoon Suk-yeol will meet Kim Jong-un. Otherwise, no, I don't see any reason for Yoon Suk-yeol to meet Kim Jong-un.
Is there likely to be any sort of escalation in rhetoric then? Are we likely to see more of a continuation of the status quo? Or might the incoming administration in Seoul be more hawkish towards Pyongyang?
If we see the notion of a Conservative Party, in terms of the economic development, there can be more progress. For example, the Kaesong Industrial Complex, if you remember, it was created by the one of the previous Conservative Party presidents. So in that sense, there can be another step forward to have some kind of trade or financial cooperation. But in terms of the military security or the approach to peace, that will be very different from the current one in between with the upcoming one. And hostility or more like taking the both Korea sides as an enemy or as a friend, I can't tell, because it's really now clear that Kim Jong-un made it clear his notion now is the nuclear program is his survival strategy and more important than ever. And now he saw Gaddafi, he saw Saddam Hussein, and now he's looking at the Ukraine, and Ukraine giving up nuclear power, then easily invaded by Russia. That really gives North Korea a lot of pledge to come up with a more military power. And on top of that, recently, these economic difficulties and also the another arduous march in North Korea and maximum sanctions, along with the COVID-19, that all these things, all come together and they made the environment really giving only one option for Kim Jong-un. So if we don't have any other alternatives, for example, my argument always is that at least we need to try something new rather than keeping the old rhetoric, because sanctions been there from 2006, and it's been already a long time. It has been really good message to tell North Korean regime that we are not happy with your regime, your nuclear power, but it hasn't changed any mindset there. So maybe it's time for us to try something alternative then see how we can come up with. Otherwise, now we are kind of in a situation that nowhere to go. Kim Jong-un comes up with a nuclear program, and the surrounding countries like the US or South Korea, Japan now, then having more deterrence against it.
What might some alternative approaches look like?
I know that whenever I say this, many of the experts in the States especially think that you are kind of naive or innocent, but I strongly believe that the changes can come from bottom. For example, in North Korea, the marketization process happened from the bottom, and now the changes can from the bottom in society. In order to make it happening, we need to have more information influx in North Korea so that people in North Korea can know what is right, what is not, and then what they can do when they see what is not right. They kind of can perceive that the regime's doing at the moment is not good for them. But that's it. They don't know what to do. That's why we don't see Arab Springs in North Korea, even though they are suffering a lot. But if we keep providing information to people there, and then they will eventually realize that they can do something against the regime, then bring that to life. That can take time, but at the same time, that can bring real change because the regime will not change. And also the sanctions now prohibit this information coming into North Korea, because one of the ways to have information in North Korea is the human contact, human exchange by the aid workers, but it doesn't happen at all. So my argument all the time is that at least having partial sanction lift and provide more people coming into North Korea, bringing more exchanges there so that people can realize and to what to do. Because for example, in North Korea, they even don't have the term like human rights. The word human rights doesn't exist there, and they don't know what that means. Then how come they go against the regime? They can show their grievance in a right way if they don't understand the term like human rights, which is very basic for us, right? So that is why I think the alternative way should come from the sanction lift, start from the sanction lift.
From the point of view of the Biden administration, at what point might North Korea become a foreign policy priority again? Because of course, if we're thinking what legacy and foreign policy the Biden administration would leave, it would be Afghanistan, it might be Ukraine in due course. That's kind of absorbed the administration's focus so far. What would it take for North Korea to become top of the agenda again?
I really don't see how North Korea can become the top of the agenda for the US, because the current foreign policy of US, so-called Indo-Pacific policy, right? In the UK, we call it Indo-Pacific tilt. And in the UK, in the US, they call it Indo-Pacific policy. They are mostly focused on China. And for North Korea, there's no way to beat China, and China is something there. We have Taiwan there, Hong Kong issue, and the China Sea, the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait. All these issues are there because of China. And now even for Ukraine and Russia, now U.S. government is seeing the Chinese officers to talk about not to help Russia. And as I heard, the result will come out soon about the discussion. Like that, China's existence is so big here. And for this little tiny fragile state like North Korea, it has its regime, but its government functions is not like the normal way of functioning. So that's why the country itself is not significant. So that is why North Korea is struggling. And if it goes extreme like a Putin, then the only way for North Korea will be, really having the real nuclear test. But that again, it will just isolate the country more and more. So for North Korea, the only way will be to have attention will be open its market, open its country, and bring more diplomatic relations, and having normalized way, then US can have a look, which I don't think Kim Jongun would be willing to do.
Yes, I would, of course, if North Korea were to liberalize, were to open its border, what sort of problems might that create for the Kim regime?
So as I said, the most significant fear for Kim's regime is information, the cultural influx nowadays. A lot of the Korean dramas coming into North Korea with the smuggling, then people easily observe. It's not just digest or understand, it's just observing, because the language is the same, and they know the South Korea is how well developed now, and they even try to follow the hairstyles, how to dress up, and even the way how they speak. That is really quick, and that is one way to change people's mind. And for North Korea, by opening up the border and opening up this market, then there will be more smuggling, there will be more people, there will be more human exchange, there will be more not only information but cultural influx there. And especially this young generation nowadays, they're the ones who had a less ideological education. For example, after the 1990s, when the government could not provide rations anymore, then these kids had to go out, try to find the food. So they couldn't be in the classrooms. So they are the ones who has a less ideological education. For them, the regime is not important, How to survive daily life is more important. And that's why they have less ideological brainwashed system now. And for them, money could be more important than the ideology. So for those kind of people, this outside information can be a trigger point to change the behavior. So for North Korean regime, that will be one of the most significant threats for the regime itself, rather than providing kind of denuclearized threats and stuff. So that's why North Korea can't open its border easily.
There have been reports out of North Korea concerning North Korea recently that it suffered terribly with economic problems more recently. North Korea has claimed for a long time that it's managed to contain COVID. A lot of experts have cast that into doubt. What problems is the Kim regime facing right now? How serious a problem is it facing?
To be honest, no one knows what exactly going on inside of North Korea, because now all these diplomats had to leave the country. We don't have any aid workers there. So basically, not only there are people being cut from outside information, but we have no access to North Korea. So we don't know what is exactly going on, and we just rely on the newspapers from North Korea or their TV, the news from North Korea. Just in a way, looking at this and that from different kinds of the information, it looks like North Korea, at least in Pyongyang, they secured a kind of vaccination from, who knows, from China or Russia. And also it looks like they are doing certain the COVID test, but they can't guarantee that they can do the test for entire population. They can't provide the vaccination for entire population. And on top of that, people are starving and their health condition is really, really bad. So they can really easily get COVID and become serious. So that is one situation which we can speculate and reasonably think. But apart from it, it's really nobody really holds the exact information about North Korea or is going on inside in terms of the COVID-19.
Sojin, thanks very much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you.